I never meant for that night to change everything. At first, it was only supposed to be a quick visit, a way to escape the silence of my own room. The streets were quiet as I walked, the glow of the streetlights washing over cracked pavement in soft, uneven patches. I remember telling myself it was nothing unusual. I had gone to Colton's house 100 times before, sometimes late at night, sometimes without a reason at all. But this time felt different, though I couldn't have explained why. Colton had been my closest friend for years. We grew up side by side, sharing classes, secrets, and a kind of loyalty that felt unshakable. He was easygoing, always laughing, always steady. If something was wrong in my world, I could count on him to pull me back to center. That night, however, when I reached his house and tapped on the door, it wasn't Colton who answered. The door creaked open, and there he stood, his father, Marcus. I knew him, of course. He wasn't a stranger to me. He had the presence of a man who carried both strength and a quiet heaviness, a figure who seemed to command attention without trying. His dark eyes met mine, and for a second, I felt as though I had intruded on something I wasn't supposed to witness. "Grant," he said, his voice low, calm, edged with surprise. "It's late. Is everything all right?" I nodded too quickly, fumbling for words. "Yeah, I wanted to see Colton. I didn't think it was that late." He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable, before stepping aside. "Come in. He's asleep already, but you can wait if you'd like." I stepped into the house, the familiar scent of cedar and faint coffee clinging to the air. The living room looked the same as always, tidy, warm, lined with bookshelves and quiet corners. But with the silence of the night pressing in, it felt strangely alive, as though every shadow carried meaning. Marcus closed the door behind me, and for a moment I was acutely aware of the sound it made, solid and final. He walked past me, his stride calm, deliberate. I followed him into the living room and sat down on the couch, trying to convince myself that this was nothing unusual. Yet the way he carried himself, controlled, steady, drew my attention in ways I didn't want to admit. "You've been coming around a lot lately," Marcus said, taking the chair across from me. He wasn't accusing me, but his tone carried weight. "Not that it's a problem. Colton values your friendship." I smiled faintly, looking at my hands. "Yeah, he's been good to me. I just like being here. I guess it feels safe." He leaned back, his eyes fixed on me, and in that silence, I realized how rare it was to speak to him without Colton around. He wasn't unkind, but he had always kept a quiet distance, letting his son be the center of attention. That night, though, it was just the two of us, and the absence of Colton shifted the air in ways I couldn't yet name. "You're a good friend to him," Marcus said softly. "Not everyone has that kind of loyalty." The word struck deeper than I expected. Loyalty had always been the thread that tied Colton and me together, but hearing it from Marcus, spoken with that steady voice, felt different, like he was looking at me more closely than he ever had before. I shifted in my seat, unsure what to do with the warmth creeping into my chest. Minutes stretched quietly between us, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I should have excused myself, told him I'd come back another time, but something rooted me there. His presence was steady like an anchor, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't want to leave. When he finally spoke again, his tone had softened. "You seem restless tonight. Something on your mind?" I hesitated, torn between honesty and the urge to brush it off. "Not really. I just couldn't sleep. Sometimes it feels easier to come here than stay at home." He nodded slowly, as though he understood more than I was saying. "Home can feel heavy sometimes." "I know." It was such a simple response, yet the way he said it carried a weight of experience. I found myself staring at him, at the quiet strength in his posture, the calm in his face. He wasn't just Colton's father in that moment. He was a man with stories, with hidden battles I had never considered. And in the stillness of the room, I realized I wanted to know them, but I also felt a flicker of something dangerous, something I didn't want to acknowledge. My gaze lingered too long, my thoughts turning in directions I told myself I shouldn't go. This was Marcus, my best friend's father, a line I had no business crossing, not even in thought. I shifted on the couch, trying to pull myself back, but he noticed. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in quiet curiosity. He studied me as though he could read the things I wasn't saying. I looked away, pretending to be interested in the books lining the shelves, though every part of me was aware of him sitting there, watching. The silence grew heavier, and with it, my unease. Yet beneath the unease, something else stirred, an undercurrent of connection that frightened me even as it pulled me closer. I didn't know what it meant, didn't want to name it, but I couldn't deny its presence. After a while, Marcus stood, his movements slow, deliberate. "I'll get you some water," he said, his tone steady, almost too steady. He walked into the kitchen, leaving me with the weight of my own thoughts. As I sat there, staring at the empty space he had left behind, I knew something had shifted that night. It was subtle, unspoken, yet undeniable. The moment he returned and placed a glass in front of me, his hand brushing the table near mine, I felt again that silent pull, that invisible thread tying us together in ways I didn't understand. I told myself it was nothing, just the strangeness of the late hour, just my imagination running wild. But deep down I knew better. That night had already begun to change something inside me, and there was no turning back. The water sat untouched in front of me, condensation sliding down the side of the glass, forming small rings on a wooden table. I stared at it as if drinking might steady the unease inside me, but the truth was, nothing could. Marcus had returned to his chair, settling in again with that same quiet composure. Yet the air between us felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, that I was only imagining it. But then his eyes caught mine again, and I felt that same flicker of connection. Small, dangerous, undeniable. I looked away too quickly, pretending to study the clock on the wall. Midnight had long passed, and the house was silent except for the faint sound of Colton's steady breathing drifting from upstairs. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together, his voice calm. "You come here because it feels safe. That says a lot." I swallowed, my throat tight. "It's different here. Quieter. My house, it doesn't feel like this." He nodded slowly, as though he understood more than I was saying. His gaze was steady, not pressing, just waiting for me to trust him with something deeper. I didn't know why I wanted to. Maybe it was the stillness of the night. Maybe the way he seemed less like someone's father and more like a man carrying his own unspoken loneliness. "You don't have to explain," he said after a moment. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't the noise outside. It's the silence inside." The words landed with surprising weight. I found myself watching him more closely, noticing the way his jaw tightened as he spoke, the way his voice carried traces of something unhealed. There was a story behind those words, something he wasn't saying, and it drew me in despite myself. I leaned back against the couch, the fabric rough beneath my hands. "You sound like you've been there before." He gave the faintest smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "More times than I care to admit." The honesty in his tone unsettled me. He wasn't hiding behind small talk or polite distance. He was offering a glimpse into the weight he carried. And somehow, I wanted to know more. "Does Colton know?" I asked quietly. Marcus shook his head. "Some things aren't meant to be shared with your children. They carry enough without your burdens added on top." I nodded, though the thought lingered. It struck me how different he seemed in that moment. Less like the father I had always seen from a distance, more like a man with cracks in his armor, someone reaching for understanding in the quiet. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It stretched between us like an invisible thread, connecting us in ways that defied explanation. Every detail of the room, the ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the house settling, felt sharper, louder because of that thread. I caught myself staring again. His hands, rough yet steady, rested on his knees. His shoulders, broad but slouched with quiet fatigue, seemed to carry years of unspoken battles. And when his eyes lifted back to mine, I felt my breath catch. I looked away quickly, heat rushing to my face. I knew it was wrong. Colton was upstairs, asleep, trusting me as he always had. This was his father. But no matter how I tried to silence it, something in me responded to Marcus in ways I couldn't control. He must have noticed. His voice was softer when he spoke next, almost tentative. You're carrying something too, aren't you? I hesitated, then nodded. I don't always know how to explain it. I just feel out of place sometimes. Like I don't fit where I should. His gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw more than just strength in him. I saw recognition, as if he had walked the same roads. I know that feeling well. The simplicity of the exchange should have ended there, but instead it deepened the pull between us. It wasn't just sympathy, it was connection, raw and startling. In his eyes, I felt seen in a way I hadn't been before, and that realization left me both comforted and shaken. The minutes passed slowly, each one folding into the next, until the night felt endless. Our words grew quieter, our silences heavier, and with every pause, the boundary between us blurred a little more. At one point, he leaned back, exhaling softly, almost as if he was fighting his own thoughts. "It's strange," he said, his voice low, almost distant. "Sometimes you don't realize how much you need someone to listen until it happens." I wanted to say something, anything, to ease the weight in his tone, but the truth was I didn't trust my voice. Instead, I nodded, my chest tight, my mind spinning. I should have left then. I should have excused myself, climbed the stairs to Colton's room, or walked back into the night. But I didn't. Something stronger kept me rooted to that spot, bound by the silent gravity between us. He noticed. His eyes lingered on me a little too long, his expression unreadable, caught between restraint and something else I didn't dare name. And I knew then he was fighting the same pull. The realization struck me with equal parts fear and longing. This wasn't one-sided. It wasn't just me imagining shadows where none existed. There was something here, alive and unspoken, threatening to break through the surface. The room grew unbearably quiet. My heartbeat echoed in my chest, each thud a reminder of the danger in the air. He looked away first, his jaw tightening, his hands clenching briefly before he released them. "You should get some rest," he said finally, his tone steady but forced. "It's late." I nodded, though my body didn't move. My throat felt dry, my thoughts tangled. When I finally stood, my legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath me had shifted. He watched me, silent, unreadable, and though he said nothing more, I could feel it, that current, alive and undeniable, threading between us. As I moved toward the stairs, I glanced back once. His eyes met mine again, and in that fleeting second, everything we hadn't said hung heavy in the space between us. I turned away quickly, forcing myself up the steps, each creak of the wood loud in the silence. But even as I reached the top, even as I slipped quietly into the guest room, I knew the truth. That night had crossed a line already, even without words spoken, even without actions taken. The betrayal hadn't yet been revealed, but it had begun, in thought, in feeling, in the silent pull that neither of us could ignore. And though I tried to tell myself otherwise, I knew I would not forget the way his eyes had lingered on mine, or the way my heart had betrayed me the moment I let it respond. Sleep never found me that night. I lay in the small guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of the house, the occasional creak in the wood, the distant hum of the heater, the soft whistle of wind pressing against the windows. My mind was restless, circling the same thoughts over and over, each one pulling me back to the look Marcus had given me before I climbed the stairs. I turned onto my side, closing my eyes, willing the thoughts away, but they refused to leave. Every time I tried to picture Colton, to remind myself why this was wrong, my mind betrayed me by pulling Marcus into focus instead. The way of his gaze, the quiet honesty in his words, the way the silence between us had felt more intimate than any touch I had ever known. It all played in loops, endless and consuming. At some point, I couldn't bear it any longer. The air in the room felt stifling, too thick, too heavy. I pushed the blanket aside and stepped softly onto floorboards, careful not to wake Colton in the next room. My body moved before my mind could catch up, guided by something I couldn't name. The hallway was dark, the kind of darkness that swallowed everything, leaving only shapes and shadows. I crept down the stairs, my heartbeat echoing in my chest, each step a reminder that I should turn back. But I didn't. The living room light was still on, dim but steady, spilling a warm glow across the walls. And there he was, Marcus, sitting in the same chair as before, his posture heavy, his eyes lost in thought. He looked up the moment I stepped off the last stair, his expression shifting from surprise to something unreadable. Couldn't sleep? His voice was low, almost too gentle. I shook my head, my throat dry. No, I just couldn't stop thinking. He studied me in silence, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment but in understanding. The quiet stretched, thick and suffocating, until I forced myself closer, sinking back onto the couch across from him. "What about you?" I asked, my voice uneven. His lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "Sleep doesn't come easy these days." The way he said it carried weight, the kind of exhaustion that went beyond a single night. I wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of whatever haunted him, but the question died on my tongue. Instead, we sat there in silence, two shadows bound by something neither of us dared name aloud. Minutes passed. The clock ticked softly in the background, each sound stretching the moment further. I felt the pull again, that invisible current threading between us, stronger now, impossible to ignore. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, as though my own body was betraying me by responding to something it shouldn't. "I shouldn't be down here," I whispered, though I didn't move. "No," he agreed quietly. "You shouldn't." But neither of us stood. Neither of us broke the silence. The weight of his words lingered in the air, not as a warning, but as an admission. When his eyes met mine again, everything I had tried to suppress unraveled. It wasn't a look of authority or distance. It was raw, vulnerable, conflicted. And in that moment, I saw the truth reflected back at me. He felt it too. The realization struck me harder than anything else. This wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't one-sided. We were both caught in the same storm, standing on opposite shores, pretending the waves weren't already pulling us under. I shifted slightly, my hand brushing the arm of the couch. His gaze followed the movement, lingering too long before returning to my face. The air grew heavier, charged, every second stretching like an eternity. "You should go back upstairs," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "I know," I whispered, but my body didn't move. The silence after that was unbearable. Every part of me screamed to end it, to break free, yet another part clung desperately to the moment, to the connection I could admit to wanting. My pulse raced, my chest tightened, and when his hand lifted slightly, almost unconsciously, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The smallest of gestures, nothing more than his fingers brushing against mine as they rested on the couch. But it was enough to confirm everything I had feared, everything I had longed for. The betrayal had taken form, not in words, not in actions too bold to name, but in the quiet surrender of two people crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. I should have pulled away. I should have broken the contact, forced myself back into reason, but I didn't. My hand stayed, trembling slightly beneath his touch, as if my body had decided long before my mind could catch up. The look in his eyes then, equal parts longing and regret, burned itself into me. It was not triumphant, not selfish. It was pain, conflicted, desperate. And maybe that was why I didn't move, because in that look I saw myself. "I can't," he whispered, barely audible, his voice breaking with the weight of it. "I know," I said, my words just as fragile. The quiet stretched again, thicker than before, and yet we stayed. For a moment, the world outside that room ceased to exist. There was no cult in the sleep upstairs, no loyalty, no rules. Only two people suspended in the fragile space between right and wrong. And then, as suddenly as it began, Marcus pulled his hand back, breaking the thread between us. He leaned away, his face tightening, his breath uneven. "This can't happen," he said firmly, though his voice trembled at the edges. I nodded, my chest aching. "I know." But knowing didn't erase the truth of what had just passed between us. Knowing didn't undo the betrayal already alive in my heart. The silence that followed was unbearable, yet neither of us spoke again. I finally stood, my legs weak, my chest heavy. He didn't stop me, didn't look at me as I turned toward the stairs. But I felt his gaze on my back, heavy and lingering, carrying everything he couldn't say. When I reached the top of the steps, I paused, my hand gripping the railing as though it could steady the storm inside me. I wanted to turn back, to look at him one more time, but I didn't. I slipped into the guest room, closed the door quietly, and leaned against it, my breath shaking. The night had betrayed us both, and though nothing more had happened, the damage was already done. The days after that night blurred into a haze of silence and restless thoughts. I walked through them like someone carrying a secret too heavy to share, my chest tight with the weight of what I had done and what I had lost. Miles still texted me, casual things about class or plans with friends, but I found myself staring at the screen, unsure how to reply. Each word from him reminded me of his father's presence in the back of my mind and of the hidden truth between us that Miles would never suspect. When I saw Miles in person, it became even harder. His laugh, his easy trust, the way he spoke about his family, all of it cut me deeper. He would talk about his dad without hesitation, calling him strict at times but dependable, proud of the way he held the household together after the divorce. Every time Miles mentioned him, I felt an invisible hand tighten around my throat. If only he knew what had happened in the quiet of that house, under the roof that was supposed to protect him. I kept waiting for Daniel to reach out again, to send a message or signal that the night had meant more to him, but he never did. There was nothing, no calls, no texts, no subtle acknowledgments when I passed their house. It was as if he had carefully folded that night into a drawer and locked it away. And maybe that was the worst part, realizing that what had shaken me to my core was something he had already decided to forget. One evening, Miles invited me over to study. I agreed, but my chest tightened as I walked up the path to his front door. I felt the weight of every step, my stomach in knots. Inside, the house smelled the same, with polish and faint traces of coffee, but it felt different. I couldn't look at the walls without remembering what they had witnessed. I couldn't breathe in the air without feeling the ghost of his father's nearness. We sat up at the kitchen table with our books spread out, Miles humming absent-mindedly as he flipped through pages. He was always like that when he studied, distracted but cheerful. At one point he leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, Dad's been different lately, quieter. I think he's dealing with something he won't tell me." The word struck me like a stone. I lowered my eyes to the book in front of me, pretending to read, but my heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to tell him everything, to rip the secret out of me so I wouldn't have to carry it anymore. But how could I? To confess would mean destroying the bond we had built, the trust he had given me without question. It would mean unraveling his world in a way he didn't deserve. Instead, I forced myself to nod. "Maybe he just needs space," I said, my voice tight but steady. Miles accepted the answer easily, moving on to the next topic. But my mind stayed fixed on a truth I couldn't share. The divide between us grew wider with every passing second. Later that night, when I left their house, Daniel stepped into the hallway. He wasn't supposed to be there. It was late, and Miles was already upstairs brushing his teeth. Our eyes met briefly. For a moment, time stretched thin, as if the whole world balanced on that glance. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply looked at me with an unreadable expression, then turned away into his room. That silent exchange told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had happened between us was over. It wasn't a beginning. It wasn't a promise. It was a single night carved into memory, destined to remain hidden forever. Walking home, I felt a strange mixture of anger and sorrow. I was angry at Daniel for pulling me into something he never intended to continue. I was angry at myself for wanting it, for allowing it to happen. But beneath that anger was grief of friendship that now carried cracks, for the innocence that had slipped through my hands, for the love I had wanted but could never claim. Weeks passed, and I tried to bury the memory, but betrayal has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. In the middle of conversations, in the quiet of sleepless nights, it returned to me. I began to wonder if maybe betrayal isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it hides in the spaces between people who care for each other. I had betrayed Miles without him ever realizing it, and in doing so, I had betrayed myself as well. Even now, when I look back, I can't say what I would have done differently. Part of me wishes I had stayed away from that house, that I had kept things simple and pure between Miles and me. Another part of me knows that the night with Daniel changed me in ways I can't deny. It forced me to confront desire, secrecy, and the dangerous lines between love and betrayal. This is a story I carry, faceless and unspoken. It's the story of a late-night visit that turned into something I never expected, something that reshaped how I see love and trust. And though no one else may ever know, the memory of that night will always remain with me, lingering like a shadow that refuses to fade.